Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our axle. The first thing we want to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, remove your center cover here, all 5 lug nuts with a 21mm socket, and then the wheel. Let's go ahead and put some penetrant on this. And this right up here. Now let's use a 12mm. We'll remove this right here. Let's take a nice pry bar, get in between this area here and separate this. Now let's use our 12mm socket on this bolt right here, remove this. Grab onto this, give it a little wiggle, separate it. Grab that caliper, we're going to slide this, separate it. Inspect your caliper, make sure you don't see any fluid. If you do, it's brake fluid, and then of course you'd have to replace this caliper. Assuming it looks good, let's go ahead and set it aside, making sure we put no pressure on our flex hose. Let's get the pads out of here. Moving along, we're going to use a 14mm socket and remove both of our caliper bracket bolts. The first one, I'm just going to loosen up until it's almost all the way out. I'll leave it in there a couple threads and then we'll fully remove the other one. There's one. Let's go ahead and get this one out of there as well. Remove the bracket, set it aside. Now let's move along to using our hammer. We're going to carefully hit along these areas here to try to break this free. Be very careful not to damage any of your studs. Now if your rotor doesn't want to come off like ours, we're just going to go ahead and take this screwdriver, carefully remove this boot right here. You don't want to lose this or damage it. We're going to be reusing it. And pop it right out of there. Now we're just going to spin this until we can find our adjuster on the inside. Once you have it lined up, just go ahead and take your screwdriver or small pry bar. We're going to go ahead and put it in here and we're going to try to de-adjust that star. Go this way. When you try to de-adjust, you want to go ahead and put it straight in, up against it, and then we're going to gently lift it up. Give this a little wiggle. Remove it from the vehicle. Now the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and clean up the mating surface of this hub right here. That's the area that the rotor is going to sit right up against, so you want to make sure you have it clean and free of any debris. Now let's take some copper never-sees. We're going to try to coat this mating surface. Now it's time to clean down our rotor. We're going to clean both of the braking surfaces, inside and out, and then of course we're going to clean the area for the e-brake shoe as well. Now it's going to be time to put the rotor on. Pay attention to this area here where the adjuster is supposed to be. It needs to line up with the larger hole. Slide that right on. Should slide on nice and easy. Let's take one of these lug nuts. We're going to start it right on here to hold the rotor for us. Let's continue on with our nice rubber boot here. Let's go ahead and slide it in there. That's going to protect all the internals from any debris that might try to make their way in. Now it's going to be time to start stripping down our bracket. There's some tins on it that you're going to want to remove. We'll go ahead and set these aside for recycling. Now the next areas that we want to pay attention to are the areas that all those tins were on. You have this on this side of the bracket and then the same on the other side. Go ahead and clean them up so they're free and clear of any debris. Okay, so now that we have all 4 of those corners cleaned up, the next area that we want to pay attention to is the area in between. This is the area that the rotor is going to be, so if you have any large flakes of rot or buildup, you want to make sure you get it off of there. You don't want it grinding up against that rotor. Now we're just going to use some parts cleaner on a rag, and we'll just go ahead and wipe down this slider right here. It's very important to have this free and clear of any debris. This is going to bind up, of course, if you left any debris on there. Now let's use some high temperature caliper grease here. We're just going to put a little bit on each of the 4 corners that we cleaned up. Now it's going to be time to put on our caliper bracket tins. You're going to notice that you have different types. 4 of them in your kit are going to have the little flat flippy do that looks just like this. You're going to want 2 of them facing in opposite directions like these right here. And then you're going to want 2 that don't have it. Once again, we have these little cutouts that kind of go off to each side. You want to make sure that they're opposite and opposite. It's very important. Now let's go ahead and start with the ones that have the flat flippy do on them. They're going to go opposite to this piece right here, which is your caliper slider. Go ahead and put it right up on like that. Pull it right over. We'll do the same for this one. That looks great. And now essentially just do the same on the other side. Let's take some of this caliper grease. We're going to put it right on this slider. Put a nice coating on there. Super important. Let's take our bracket with our bolts. I always like to use a little bit of red thread locker on these. We'll go ahead and slide it right over the rotor. We're going to line up those bolt holes, start in both of our bolts, snug them up, then torque them to 34 foot-pounds. This one's of course hard to get to. Now it's going to be time to install our brake pads. We want to have the inboard pad with the wear indicator, and we want to have that wear indicator facing up. If you have the pad with the facing down, it's not going to work right. So just go ahead and have it just like this. I'm going to slide it right into position. Do the same to the outer pad. Now we're going to move along to preparing our caliper. We want to have this caliper piston right here pressed all the way up into there. You can use a caliper depression tool like this. Get right in there. We're just going to give this a little squeeze. Push it back as far as it can go. Now let's move along to removing this slider boot right here. We'll set this aside. And then we're going to go ahead and remove this slider right here. Sometimes they can be stuck, but generally you can just kind of push it out one side or the other. I'm just going to try to push this out of here. There we are. I'm just going to take a nice rag, try to put it right on through here. Now we're going to spread this boot as far as possible, and we're just going to kind of work it around a little bit. And what I essentially want to do is just try to get off any of that gunk that might be located on the inside. Oh, you can see it all. Get it all off of there. Inspect it, make sure it's nice and pliable, soft, and it's definitely not torn in any way. This one here we can set aside, and now we're just going to do the same to this one. You don't necessarily have to remove this from the caliper, but if you wanted to, you could just kind of squeeze these ends like that, and then you can kind of pop them out. Now once you have both of the boots clean, let's continue on by making sure that we clean up this area where the boot's going to ride. You want to make sure that's free and clear of any debris, and then of course all inside this area. You don't want any large chunks of anything in there in case it falls out and gets caught in your brakes. Now let's clean out this slider port. Let that dry. While that's drying, let's continue on by cleaning the slider. There's several areas on the slider that you want to pay attention to. Looking at this, you have the entire shaft area. You need to make sure that that's clean and free of any debris, no rust deposits or anything that might bind this up inside the caliper. And then you also want to inspect both the areas where the boot's going to be. This is super important because if you leave anything in there, it could potentially cause an area where moisture can make its way in and seize it up. Now it's time to use some caliper grease. We're going to go ahead and try to get inside this boot. I'm going to try to work its way all the way up inside there and just coat the entire area. Around a little bit. Get that boot so it's completely situated. You want to make sure the boot's sitting inside the groove there. Just kind of work it back and forth. There we are. Check both sides. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and take a little bit of Caliper lubricant. We're just going to go along the outer lip of this right here. You don't necessarily need to get inside of this. You can if you want, but of course we did already lubricate the pin that's located right there. So on there. Let's get this boot on here. You got the wider end, it goes right on here. Now we're going to use caliper grease directly on the caliper piston here. And then along the backside of each of these ears. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now let's slide that caliper pin right into this boot here. Work it around a little bit as we go. We're going to take this, slide it right down and over those pads. Line up the slider pin with the bracket here. Now you want to double check to make sure that the boot is sitting up and over the ear of the bracket. Like I said before, you want to make sure no moisture can make its way in. Super important. Now let's get this bolt in here. We're going to bottom this out, and then we'll torque it to 20 foot-pounds. Once we have that all together, let's go ahead and remount our flex hose here. For this, I generally don't use any thread locker on it. You want to make sure that this can come out fairly easily in the future. Let's get our wheel on here. Now what we're going to do is just go ahead and snug these up. We'll get the wheel back on the ground, and then we're going to torque these to 76 foot-pounds. We've got the wheel back on the ground. Let's go ahead and torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Of course, if your vehicle had the center cover, go ahead and pop that right back on. Okay friends, we got this side back together. What's left to do now? Now you're going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the vehicle. The process is going to be the exact same. Aside from that, go ahead and hop inside the passenger compartment. Make sure you pump up those brakes. They need to be nice and firm. After that, take it for a road test.